Welcome back, everyone. So we're going to continue on with chapter 11, animal structure and function. So in our last video, we took a look at animal form and function. So now we're going to take a closer look at animal primary tissues in 11.3. Okay, so if you recall from our hierarchical organization, cells make up tissues and then tissues make up organisms. So we're going to focus in on those primary tissues that make up the more complex organs and organ systems. Okay. So by the end of this chapter, you should be able to describe what epithelial tissues are, discuss the different types of connective tissues in animals, describe the 3 types of muscle tissues, and describe nervous tissues. So we're going to be focusing on all 4 types. You will note that in our course objectives, you don't need to go into too much detail. So I'm going to be going into a lot more detail than you'll need for the exam and things like that. But this will give you a preview of what you will learn in your anatomy courses, which I assume you'll be taking after this course. Okay. So let's start out by, again, reviewing our life's hierarchical organization. So we learned about this way back at the beginning of the terms. So remember that the smallest unit of life is a cell, and cells contain all of the properties of life. And then if we take similar cells that carry out related functions, they form tissues. So we're going to be focusing on the 4 primary tissue types, okay? The epithelial tissue, the connective tissue, the muscle tissue, and the nervous tissue. And the reason why we're focusing on the 4 tissue types is that when we take our tissues, we combine them to form the organs in our body. And then those organs have specific specialized functions in our body. So for example, the stomach has a specialized function in our body, and it's part of the organ system, the digestive system. So we'll learn that our different organs, a lot of them have, or most of them actually have all 4 tissue types in them. So we'll learn about these 4 types as kind of a foundation to build upon in our future anatomy. Okay. So we're going to start out by looking at, we'll go in order. So we'll go ahead and start with epithelial tissue. So epithelial tissue is the tissue that covers the outside of organs and the structures in the body and that line, like the lumens of the organs. So for example, your skin is, what you're seeing right now is epithelial tissue. The tissue that lines the outside of your heart, that's epithelial tissue. Okay, so all lines the organs, all that, the outside of the organs, the structures of the body, that would be considered epithelial tissue. And the way that we classify our epithelial tissue, it's by the shape and the number of layers of cells. Okay, so we have 4 main shapes. We'll go through each shape specifically and discuss their function, but I do want to point out in your textbook, they have a nice table that basically summarizes everything. So you can see how we have, the squamous or squamous, I've seen it pronounced, or I've heard it pronounced both ways, cuboidal, columnar, and transitional. Okay, and then it gives you the description of each, and then some of the locations of them. So this would be a good summary table to rely on when you're kind of reviewing the information. Okay, so I left it up here for you, but just realize that I'm going to be going through each one individually, starting with the squamous. Okay, so you can look at this on your own in the textbook. Okay, so let's start with squamous. So squamous epithelial, if you take a look at them from the picture here, they're flat, they're round, and they have a small centrally located nucleus. They can be in 1 layer or multiple layers. Okay, so if they are in a single layer, their job is generally to facilitate diffusion. So for example, if you think about in your blood vessels, your capillaries are the smallest of your blood vessels, and they basically are there for exchange. Okay, so they exchange for gas exchange, they nutrient exchange, waste exchange. So they are just a single layer, and that's going to help facilitate diffusion because of that large surface area. Okay, so they'll be lining the capillaries. They line different areas of the body for diffusion. When we have a more layered approach, it's called stratified. And I guess I didn't put stratified here, but stratified squamous, it's in the other one, I think. Oh, maybe not. So we just have, oh yeah, stratified. So simple, we have the long epithelial and the capillaries, like I mentioned. And then stratified is multi-layered. Okay, so multi-layered. So you can see here, here's like our skin, for example. So our skin is multi-layered squamous epithelial. So we have these small, flat, round, if you take a look at the surface of your skin, that's what these cells are, but they're layered on top of each other. So you can see a whole bunch of layers. And so these whole bunch of layers is used for protection from outside abrasion and damage. Okay, so we have lots of layers, and the layers on top are dead, and then the living layers of our skin are down below. Okay. Another type of epithelial tissue is cuboidal epithelia. So cuboidal sounds like a cube. So these are cube shaped, and they have a central nucleus. So here is one single cube. Here's another single cube. Yeah, the way they're arranged looks a little weird, but this is cuboidal shaped cell. They're usually in a single layer, so they would be single layered, and some examples would be glandular tissue. So glandular tissue, what does it do? It prepares and secretes glandular material. So you can see here, this would be an example of something that might produce and secrete some sort of glandular material. Or maybe the walls of a tubule or the ducts, for example, in like your kidneys or your liver, it might line the ducts, and so something might be passing through the center. Okay, so these are examples of cuboidal, simple cuboidal epithelial. All right. And then moving on, we have our columnar epithelial. So the columnar epithelial cells, sorry, it's this one down here. They're usually in a single layer, okay, and for example, they're found in the digestive tract. And so if you think about, your small intestine is designed to absorb the nutrients that you've been digesting throughout your digestive tract. And so we have, just one single layer thick. And then right on the other side is usually a blood vessel. And so we have, these specialized cells that are able to absorb the nutrients from the small intestine directly through the cell into the waiting capillary, which will then feed into another blood vessel and send it to wherever it needs to go in your body. Okay. Goblet cells, those are secretion cells. They'll be secreting something into the small intestine, but you don't need to know that just yet. Let's see, and then we also have, with the columnar cells, we could also have what are called pseudostratified. So, instead of having a single stack, it could be what's called pseudostratified. So pseudostratified is also a single stack. I mean, if you look at it, it's, attached to the base. There's no double stacks here. But because of the placement of the nuclei, it appears that it's stratified, even though it's not. Okay, so pseudostratified columnar epithelial cells typically line our respiratory tract, and so they're designed to have these cilia that kind of beat back and forth, and these cells that secrete mucus into our respiratory tract, and that helps trap particles. so that when we're breathing in, we don't want air particles to get into our lungs, because our lung tissue, especially the alveoli, is that simple squamous epithelial cells. Those are very small, thin layers of cells. They could damage very easily. So the pseudostratified columnar epithelial cells, they can help trap particles or remove them from the lungs, keep those lungs clean. And then the last type of epithelial tissue is called transitional epithelia. It's also known as uroepithelial, which is because it's found only in the urinary system. So think urinary system. And what's interesting about these cells is that they're arranged in a stratified layer. So you can see, here's one cell, here's another cell, here's another cell. So they're in multiple layers here. But as the tissue expands, the tissue transitions from thick to thin. So these are the type of cells that line, especially your bladder and your ureters. So when your bladder is filling, the tissue starts to, go from a thicker to a thinner stage as it expands, and then you have this full bladder. Okay, so it's what we call transitional, because it's it's more unique than the others that kind of stay the same. Okay, so that's epithelial tissue. So again, epithelial tissue, it's mainly found around organs, and it's there for mainly just keeping things in place and protection. The next type is connective tissues. So with connective tissues, we typically have what's called a matrix, and that matrix is consisted of living tissue and non-living substance, which we call ground substance. So the ground substance, so the living tissues would be the actual cells, and then the ground substance is made of some sort of organic substance, usually a protein, and an inorganic substance, usually a mineral or water. Okay, so that ground substance is, the non-living substance, and then we have the living component, which would be the cells. Okay, so our primary cell in connective tissue is called a fibroblast. So fibroblasts, they're motile. They are able to carry out mitosis. They can synthesize any connective tissue that are needed. Okay. And then for the organic portion of our ground substance, we do have, or the protein fibers, we do have 3 different types. We have collagen, we have elastic, and we have reticular fibers. So the collagen fibers, they're made for strength. Okay, so they're basically prevents things from being torn or separated. So think of any tissue that's it's going to protect it. It's very, very strong, so it protects it from being torn. Okay, whereas elastic tissues are made of elastin, and so they're providing more flexibility, so they can stretch 1.5 times its length. Okay, so that's an elastic fiber. And then reticular fibers, they contain thin strands of collagen, and they kind of go on, make like a mat and a network of fibers, and they're used to hold the tissues and organs in place and connected to each other. Okay, so they're supporting the actual structure. So I know I went through these kind of terms really fast, but again, you just need to know mainly, the types of connective tissues, which we're going to get into, and then, what their job is and their location. So this is just kind of showing, just in general, what connective tissues are. So they're usually made of some sort of ground substance and some sort of living component. The main type of cell would be the fibroblasts, and then usually they're a collection of some type of collagen fibers and elastic fibers, and maybe some reticular fibers. Okay? So just like with the epithelial tissue, it's a good idea to reference the textbook. There's a table that kind of describes the different types of connective tissues for you, and then gives you, some information about them and then their location. So you can see that we're going to actually go through these 6 different types. Okay, so we'll go through each one and kind of summarize them. Again, I'm going to go through it pretty quickly because you don't really need to know all the details of what all the information is for the purposes of this class. Okay, so this is just more of just kind of highlighting the different types of tissues, where they're located, and some interesting information about them, which will help you in the beginnings of your anatomy physiology course. Next term probably. Okay. So the first type of connective tissue is called the loose connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue is another term for it. I always learned it as loose, so that's how I usually reference it. But mainly it's just a collection of all of the components of connective tissue. So we have the matrix part, we have the fibroblasts, those are the cells. Okay, so you can see the cells there. You see the different elastin fibers. You can see the collagen in the elastin fibers there. So it has a good sampling of all the different components of the connective tissues. And this type of connective tissue is tough. Okay, so it tends to be tough, and it tends to be flexible. And it comprises a lot of the membranes. Okay, so think about outside of our blood vessels, we have loose connective tissue, and so it holds those blood vessels in place. Okay, so think about your aorta, your pulmonary arteries, your carotid artery. All of these blood vessels are held in place by loose connective tissue. Okay, it's also found surrounding most body organs, keeping those organs secure and in place. Okay, but it also provides that flexibility. All right, so that's the first type. The next type, you can see a big difference. So look at the difference between loose versus fibrous. So loose is loose, okay? Lots of space in between, the matrix in between. Whereas the fibrous connective tissue has very few cells or matrix material. So it's basically just large amounts of collagen fibers. Okay, so you can see how much fibrous, collagen there is. Very few fibroblasts. You don't even see much matrix in there, the more liquidy part. Okay. It can be arranged irregularly, so not this nice parallel striations. Though the fibrous connective tissue that's more irregular is found in areas where there's a lot of stress from all directions. So think about your skin. We have our stratified squamous epithelial tissue on top, but down below that we have the fibrous connective tissue. Okay, and that's going to allow for so we have the epidermis up here, that's made of epithelial tissue, and then the dermis is below that, and that's going to basically allow for strong connective tissue that will hold everything in place. Okay, and allow for all sorts of stretching and movement. So think about your skin as always moving and stretching. Okay, and then the other type of fibrous connective tissue we have that's more regularly arranged in parallel lines, like what you see here. So that's found in more of our tendons and our ligaments. So if you know anything about tendons and ligaments, so tendons connect muscles to bones, and ligaments connect bone to bone. Okay, so if you tear a tendon, that's gonna hurt, right? And same with if you tear a ligament, it's gonna put you out of you're gonna not be able to exercise for a little bit, or that body part. because, you're basically tearing this type of tissue. And so this is, very strong, collagen fibers that's designed for strength. And so when you tear one of these, it's going to take some time to repair it. Okay. Moving on to cartilage. So look at cartilage compared to the last two. So cartilage contains a lot of matrix, and then there's some fibers in there as well. Okay, so the matrix, it's a lot different than seeing a bunch of fibers like we see with the loose connective tissue and the fibrous connective tissue. So here we have a different type of cells. These are called chondrocytes, and the chondrocytes, they make up the matrix and the fibers, and you can see them in these little spaces within the cartilage, which we call lacunae. Okay, so these are little spaces in there. And there's generally 3 types of cartilage that we talk about in our bodies. So we have something called hyaline cartilage. So hyaline cartilage contains few collagen elastin fibers, and so it's typically found at the end of our long bones. So think of like your femur. So at the end of those bones, and since it has, it's this type of cartilage that has few collagen or elastin fibers, it helps reduce friction and cushioning the articulations of these bones. So think about how your femur kind of fits into that, that's got a ball and socket type joint into your pelvis. And so if you have this hyaline cartilage lying at the end of the long bone, it's going to, at the end of the femur, it's going to help reduce that friction and cushion that articulation of the bones. Okay. Elastic cartilage you're familiar with because your ears are made of it. So it's large amounts of elastin fibers, and it gives that flexibility, so you can kind of tug on your ear and kind of move it around. It's got that flexibility. Okay. Your voice box also has elastic cartilage that allows for your voice cords to be able to move and everything. And then finally we have fibrocartilage. So fibrocartilage contains a large amount of collagen, and since it does contain a lot of collagen, it has a tremendous amount of strength behind it. So you can find fibrocartilage in between your vertebrae in what we call the intervertebral discs. So if you've ever known somebody who slipped a disc, ooh, that hurts, okay? Because basically now you have bone on bone, and you don't have that, nice cushion, collagen that's giving tremendous strength to your backbone. Fibrocartilage is also what happens when you have like an injury to an area of your cartilage. It gets replaced with fibrocartilage, and so that injury becomes a lot more stiff than the original. A lot of times, if it's a really bad injury. And so that's due to fibrocartilage being there instead of more flexible cartilage. Okay. And then we have bone. So bone, you might not think is a connective tissue, but it is a connective tissue. It's also known as osseous tissue. This one has large amounts of organic and inorganic matrix. Okay, so the organic matrix is some sort of collagen and elastic, which gives the strength and the flexibility, whereas the inorganic matrix would be the mineral salts, mostly calcium. So that gives it the hardness to the tissue. Okay, and so with our bone, we have 3 types of living cells. We have the osteoblasts, the osteocytes, and the osteoclasts. Okay, so these are found within the non-living, the hard parts. So you can see like the bone structure, and then we'll have living parts within there. And so the osteoblasts, their job is making bone for growth and remodeling. Okay, so the osteoblasts, they'll be making the bone. So very productive, especially in your earlier years. And then they kind of go dormant, or cease to exist after a while, and or not very there's not as many of them later on. Osteocytes are found in the lacunae. So remember, the lacunae are like these little spaces. Okay, so they're just found within there. And then we have the osteoclasts. They're found on the surface of the tissue, and they help break down bone for bone remodeling. Okay, so the osteoblasts make the bone, osteoclasts break down the bone. Okay, and then finally we have two types of bone. We have compact and we have spongy. And so compact, if you think about it, compact is going to be more compact. So this is found in, like, if you take a look at your femur, this would be in the shaft part of the femur, or the diaphysis, so it's the main part, or it's found, like if we're talking about the scapula or a flat bone, it's on the surface. Okay. Spongy bone is found at the ends of a long bone. So if you have a dog and you ever give your dog a bone, okay, so think of the ends of the bone is more spongy, and then the shaft of the bone is more compact. Okay, so the spongy part, the epiphysis, is found at the end. So that would be spongy bone. Compact bone is in the diaphysis, or the shaft of the bone, the long part. Okay. All right, and moving right along, we have two more in our connective tissue talk. Adipose, also known as fat tissue. So this one, it doesn't really look like it's part of a tissue, because it doesn't look like anything. It doesn't really have fibroblasts. It doesn't really have a matrix to it, and there's only a few fibers there. But it's considered part of the connective tissue. It's made of something called adipocytes, which are fat cells. And what do? They collect and store fat. So you can think of our triglycerides that we learned about way back at the beginning of the term. So they're stored in these adipocytes. So our adipose tissue can serve a couple of purposes. So it can serve as insulation. So that helps maintain our body temperature, so that we can keep our body temperature at a constant 97 degrees Fahrenheit, or 98 degrees Fahrenheit. And so this adipose tissue helps insulate it. Okay. It also surrounds a lot of our body organs and provides cushioning. Okay, so that if you think about like your abdominal cavity, you do have a layer of adipose tissue, so that when you're doing jumping jacks, or you're wrestling, or you're bouncing around, that your spleen is not bouncing into your heart or anything, and you're damaging, causing damage to your body organs. So it just kind of cushions things for you. And then finally we have blood. So the blood is a connective tissue, and so we have different types of parts to our blood. So we have mainly the cells, would be the living parts, and then we have the plasma. The plasma is also known as the matrix. Okay, and then we have these things called platelets, which are kind of parts of cells. So let's talk about the main parts, the cells. So the cells, we have the red blood cells and the white blood cells. The red blood cells are also known as erythrocytes. So that makes up the majority of your blood cells. And their job is to deliver oxygen to the tissues. Okay, so you can see that concave shape, perfect for adhering oxygen to their surface. Okay. And then finally, the other type, the white blood cells, or also known as the leukocytes, they're part of your immune response. So we have different types of leukocytes. You can see in this picture here, you have like a neutrophil, a monocyte, lymphocyte, basophil, and eosinophil. So these are all, they perform different functions. So the neutrophils up here, they're phagocytic. So what is phagocytosis? You recall that's where they engulf and digest another particle. So in this case, that particular neutrophil is basically attacking and removing bacteria through phagocytosis. Okay. Monocytes are a type of leukocyte that actually give rise to macrophages. So macrophages, their job is to clean up any dead or damaged cells. So if you have like an bacterial infection, you have a lot of dead bacteria, you have a lot of dead white blood cells that lost the battle and so forth. And so you got a macrophage that comes and clean up all the dead and damaged cells. And then we have the eosinophils and the basophils. So those are part of the immune response. Okay, so they will, help cause inflammation to the area to bring more red blood cells and things like that. Okay. And then these platelets, they're not really a cell, but sometimes people call them thrombocytes because they originate in your bone marrow, and they participate in the coagulation of blood. Okay, so that if you get cut, we don't want you to bleed and bleed and bleed. So these platelets will basically accumulate around the wound and create a temporary band-aid and allow you and help the blood kind of coagulate and so forth, so that it plugs up the little wound. Nature's band-aid. Okay. So that's our connective tissue. So, blood, adipose tissue are different fibrous connective tissues, or loose connective tissues, and the bone. So those are all different types. Okay, so very diverse category. Okay. And then moving right into muscle tissue. So with muscle tissue, we're familiar with muscle, so that's used for movement. We have three types, and they differ by the presence or absence of striations or bands. So, think of like the parallel lines that we saw in fibrous connective tissue. They kind of look like that. We also differ, or divide them based on the number and location of the nuclei, and whether they're voluntary or involuntarily controlled, and based on their location. So we have three types: smooth, skeletal, and cardiac. So here's another good review table to look at that kind of summarizes everything. Okay. So let's take a look at our three types. So there's our three types. So right away you can see, some slight differences there. So with the smooth muscle tissue, notice it does not have these little striations. So striations are these little stripes that you see. This one doesn't, it's smooth. So that's one characteristic that separates them. They don't have those little bands, okay? The smooth muscle cells, they are found in your digestive system and the reproductive system and things like that. It's involuntary movement, so you can't really tell your body to move your food along in your small intestine. It does so involuntarily through something called peristalsis. Okay. Same with like in the reproductive system, for example, in the fallopian tubes, as the egg is moving down from the ovaries into the uterus, it's moving through peristalsis, this kind of smooth muscle contraction that lines that, is part of that, part of the fallopian tube. Okay, so and it's involuntary. Nobody feels the contractions going on. Okay, skeletal muscle, that's more of the striations. Okay, so you can see those striations compared to the smooth. And these striations are due to the actin and myosin. Okay, so those fibers that are contracting and relaxing. This type of muscle tissue has relatively long muscle cells, and you'll notice they have multiple nuclei in them. So if this is a muscle cell, you can see multiple nuclei in there. So that's different from like smooth muscle cells that just have a single nuclei. Okay. And skeletal muscles, they are voluntarily movable. Okay, so these are the muscles that are attached to your bones. Okay, so they help move your body. Okay, so that's a voluntary movement. If you want to move your foot, okay, those muscles are voluntary muscles that are moving your foot. Okay. And then the last one is cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle is only found in the heart, so that's easy to remember. And it has striations as well, okay, but the striations, instead of being kind of vertical, like the skeletal, they're more horizontal. And they don't have multiple nuclei like the skeletal, they just have a single nuclei. You can see them, okay. Now, one interesting thing about the cardiac muscles is that they have these intercalated discs. So you can see these intercalated discs in between the cells, and that assists in passing electrical impulses from one cell to the next. So if you think about the heart, the reason why you have a heartbeat, the bum 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 bum, it's controlled by an electrical impulse. Now you want all of the heart cells to be contracting at the same time. Okay, you don't want like one part of your heart contracting, those cells over in this part contracting at a different time than this part. Okay, that would make it so that you would lose the power, the sheer power and volume behind the contraction of like the ventricles. And so these intercalated discs, they help assist in passing those electrical impulses so that the muscle cells can contract all at the same time. Okay, so it helps so that we have one unit of cells contracting at the same time. So that's our muscle cells. And then finally we have nervous tissue. So with our nervous tissue, it's basically made of cells that are specialized to receive and transmit electrical impulses. And so the main tissue, or cell type I should say, is a neuron. And the neurons are the funniest looking cells you'll see. Okay, it looks like a little alien. And so the central part of the neuron, the cell body, contains the nucleus. And then off of the cell body, we have these little finger-like projections. Those are dendrites. And the dendrites are the receiving end of the impulse. Okay, so they'll receive the message from a nearby neuron. Okay, so they'll receive that impulse through their dendrites. That impulse will travel down the axon, where it passes out to another neuron through its dendrites. Okay, so you can see the dendrites receive the signal. The axon is passing the signal on to the next neuron. Okay, so the axon's kind of like the tail, and then the dendrites are these little finger-like projections. Okay. We also have some other cells that are associated with the neurons. So the astrocytes, they help regulate the chemical environment of the nerve cell. So the nerve cell has to have, a very specific environment for it to work well in. It has to have constant supply of like sodium and potassium and things like that. The astrocyte can kind of aid in making sure the neuron has exactly what it needs. And then the oligodendrocytes, these guys, they help form what's called the myelin sheath along the axon, and that helps insulate the axon, and that helps support the transmission of the electrical impulse. so that the electrical impulse doesn't like go off somewhere else. It will be insulated and travel right along the axon to the next dendrite. Okay. And then we have other things like glial cells that offer other support. Okay. So that's our neuron. So now we have a bunch of review questions and then we're done. So which type of epithelial tissue is best adapted to aid diffusion? Would it be A, squamous, B, cuboidal, C, columnar, or D, transitional? So which one's best for diffusion? If you said A, squamous, I would agree with you. Specifically, the simple squamous, right? The single layered squamous. So this one would be the best for diffusion because it has a flat layer, so it has a larger surface area. So A is the correct answer. Next question, which type of epithelial cell is found in glands? Would it be A, squamous, B, cuboidal, C, columnar, or D, transitional? So which one's found in glands? If you said B, cuboidal, I would agree with you. So remember the cuboidal cells are the ones that line the ducts and the tubes of your kidneys and your liver. They help secrete the secretions from glandular tissue. So B, cuboidal. Here's another question. Which type of connective tissue has the most fibers? Would it be A, loose connective tissue, B, fibrous connective tissue, C, cartilage, or D, bone? Which has the most? Well, most fibers, it must be the fibrous connective tissue, right? So B is the correct answer. Okay, so fibrous connective tissue, remember how densely packed that fibrous connective tissue was. So it's mostly fibrous tissue. Okay. And then we have a cell found in bone that breaks it down, so it breaks down the bone, is called N. Is it A, osteoblast, B, osteocyte, C, osteoclast, or D, osteon? So what type of cell breaks bone down? If you said C, osteoclast, I would agree with you. So remember, the osteoclast breaks it down. So if you got that one right, this one should be easy. A cell found in bone that makes the bone is called an A, osteoblast, B, osteocyte, C, osteoclast, or D, osteon. If you said A, osteoblast, I would agree with you. So remember, the osteoblast makes the bone, osteoclast breaks it down. And then we have plasma. Plasma is the A, fibers in blood, B, matrix in blood, C, cell that phagocytizes bacteria, or D, the cell fragment found in the tissue. So plasma is if you said B, matrix in the blood, I would agree with you. So plasma is the matrix. It's the liquid part. So it carries the nutrients and stuff like that. The cell that phagocytizes bacteria, do you remember what type that one was? So that was a neutrophil. And the cell fragment found in the tissue was the thrombocyte, otherwise known as a platelet. And then we have the type of muscle cell under voluntary control is it A, smooth muscle, B, skeletal muscle, C, cardiac muscle, or D, visceral muscle? So which one's voluntary? If you said B, skeletal muscle, I would agree with you. So skeletal muscle attaches to your bones. If you want to move your bones, you can voluntarily do so with your skeletal muscle. And then we have the part of a neuron that contains the nucleus. Is that called the cell body, the dendrite, the axon, or the glial? So the area that contains the nucleus is the cell body A. The dendrites come off of the cell body, and then the axon is where it transmits the signal to the next neuron. Okay, but the nucleus is found in the cell body. And then finally we have, why are intercalated discs essential to the function of cardiac muscle? Is it A, the discs maintain the barriers between the cells? B, the discs pass nutrients between the cells? C, the discs ensure that all the cardiac muscle cells beat as a single unit? Or is it D, the discs control the heart rate? So why are intercalated discs essential? So if you said C, I would agree with you. So remember, those intercalated discs ensure that all the cardiac muscle cells beat as a single unit. So they help transmit the electrical impulse to give that signal so that the muscle cells beat all at the same time. Okay, so C is the correct answer there. All right, so we are done with 11.3 animal primary tissues. So by now you should be able to describe epithelial tissues. You should be able to discuss the different types of connective tissues in animals, as well as describe the 3 types of muscle tissues: smooth, skeletal, and cardiac, and then describe nervous tissue. So for the final section in chapter 11, we're going to get into homeostasis.